Good morning, friends. It's Donna Chase, Director of Christian Formation at First Presbyterian Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. Welcome to our Back to School Story Time session today. This is also part of the summer series that we've had in June and July called Let's Talk and Read About Race Together. Today's story is the story of Ruby Bridges, a great story for us to consider as we move back into the school setting. I also want to take just a few minutes to tell you about some wonderful opportunities coming up for you this week and in the following weeks as we prepare for our fall programming. This Wednesday is the last Wednesday drive-by where you can bring not only canned food, but you can also bring school supplies for Guilford County children. These will be supplies that hopefully will help not only children but also teachers in their classrooms. So we would encourage you to please give generously. You can go online and see the school supply list, of which some are new or gently used supplies. Others are supplies, once again, gently used for classrooms. We also would encourage you to take part this Sunday from 3 to 4 in our Back to School Blessing Drive-By. You can bring your school supplies on Sunday. You can come by and pick up a special blessing bag that will have many ways for you as children and parents to get ready for a new school season. We also want to encourage you to be praying and thinking about all of our teachers and school administrators as they get ready to return to school in what is not a normal school year. So we ask for your prayers for them, and you'll get an opportunity during the Back to School Blessing on Sunday to create prayers. If you'd like to bring a prayer card or a drawing for a teacher that we could give to them for encouragement, we would ask you to do that as well. Another thing that I wanted to make you aware of is our new FPC Parent Facebook group, where we are posting weekly articles and also ways for you as parents to connect with one another, encourage one another, and support one another as a faith community. We have a blog and a group of prayers for parents, once again, that is part of our Back to School series. So many opportunities for you to engage in service and also in supporting, encouraging, and nurturing one another in faith as we prepare for a new school year. So let's get started and hear the story of Ruby Bridges. It's by Robert Coles, and Robert is a school psychologist. If you remember, Ruby Bridges was the first black child to attend an all-white elementary school. The book starts with a quote from Ruby's mother. "Our Ruby taught us all a lot. She became someone who helped change our country. She was part of history. Just like generals and presidents are part of history. They are leaders, and so was Ruby. She led us away from hate, and she led us nearer to knowing each other, the white folks and the black folks." The story of Ruby Bridges. Ruby Bridges was born in a small cabin near Tylertown, Mississippi. "We were very poor. Very, very poor," Ruby said. "My daddy worked picking crops, and we just barely got by. There were times when we didn't have much to eat. The people who owned the land were bringing in machines to pick the crops, so my daddy lost his job, and that's when we had to move. I remember us leaving. I think I was 4. In 1957, our family moved to New Orleans. Ruby's father became a janitor, and her mother took care of children during the day. After they were tucked in bed at night, Ruby's mother went to work scrubbing floors at a bank, and every Sunday they went to church. "We wanted our children to be near God's Spirit," Ruby's mother said. "We wanted them to start feeling close to God from the very beginning." At that time, black children and white children went to separate schools. The black children were not able to receive the same education as the white children. It wasn't fair, and it was against the nation's law. In 1960, a judge ordered 4 black girls to go to 2 white elementary schools, and 3 of the girls were sent to McDonough 19. 6-year-old Ruby Bridges was sent to 1st grade in the William France Elementary School. Ruby's parents were proud that their daughter had been chosen to take part in such an important event in American history. They went to church. "We sat and we prayed to God," Ruby's mother said. "We prayed that we would be strong and have courage and get through any trouble. And Ruby would be a good girl, and she'd hold her head up high and be a credit to her own people and a credit to all American people. We prayed long and we prayed hard." On Ruby's first day, a large crowd of angry white people gathered outside the France Elementary School. They carried signs that said they didn't want black children in a white school. They called her names, and some wanted to hurt her. The city and state police did not help Ruby. The President of the United States ordered federal marshals to walk with Ruby into the school building. The marshals carried guns. Every day for weeks that turned into months, Ruby experienced that kind of school day. She walked to school surrounded by marshals, wearing a clean dress and a bow in her hair and carrying her lunch pail. Ruby slowly walked for the first few blocks, and as she approached the school, she saw a crowd of people marching up and down the street. Men and women and children shouted at her. They pushed towards her. The marshals kept them from Ruby by threatening to arrest them. Ruby would hurry through the crowd and not say a word. The white people in the neighborhood would not send their children to school, and when Ruby got inside the building, she was all alone except for her teacher, Mrs. Henry. There were no other children to keep Ruby company, to play with and learn with, to eat lunch with. But every day, Ruby went into the classroom with a big smile on her face, ready to get down to the business of learning. She was polite. She worked well at her desk, Mrs. Henry said. She enjoyed her time. She didn't seem nervous or anxious or irritable or scared. She seemed as normal and relaxed as any child I've ever taught. So Ruby began learning how to read and write in an empty classroom, in an empty building. Sometimes I'd look at her and wonder how she did it, said Mrs. Henry. How she went by those mobs and sat there all by herself and yet seemed so relaxed and comfortable. Mrs. Henry would question Ruby in order to find out if she was really nervous and afraid, even though she seemed so calm and confident. But Ruby kept saying she was doing fine. The teacher decided to wait and see if Ruby would keep on being so relaxed and hopeful, or if she'd gradually begin to wear down, or even decide she no longer wanted to go to school. Then one morning something happened. Mrs. Henry stood by a window in her classroom as she usually did, watching Ruby walk towards the school. Suddenly, Ruby stopped. right in front of that howling mob and screaming people. She stood there facing all of those men and women. She seemed to be talking to them. Mrs. Henry saw Ruby's lips moving and wondered what she could be saying. The crowd seemed ready to kill her. The marshals were frightened. They tried to persuade Ruby to just keep moving. They tried to hurry her into the school, but Ruby would not budge. They stopped. Then Ruby stopped talking and walked into the school. When she went in the classroom, Mrs. Henry asked her what happened. Miss Henry told Ruby that she'd been watching and she was surprised that Ruby stopped and talked to the people in the mob. Ruby became irritated. "I didn't stop and talk to them," she said. "But Ruby, I saw you talking," Mrs. Henry said. "I saw your lips moving." "I wasn't talking," said Ruby. "I was praying. I was praying for them." Every morning, Ruby had stopped a few blocks away from school to say a prayer for the people who hated her. This morning she forgot until she was already in the middle of the angry mob. When school was over for the day, Ruby hurried through the mob as usual, and after she walked a few blocks and the crowd was behind her, Ruby said a prayer that she repeated twice a day, before and after school. "Please, God, try to forgive those people, because even if they say bad things, they don't know what they're doing. So you could forgive them, just like you did those folks a long time ago when they said terrible things about you." The back of the book is about the author, the illustrator, and more of what happened in Ruby's story. Later that year, 2 white boys joined Ruby at the school. Their parents were just tired of seeing the boys get into mischief around the house when they could have been in school learning. The mob became angry when the first white boys went back to school, but they were soon joined by other children. "We've been sitting back and letting our children get cheated out of an education because some people have tried to make the law in their own hands. It's time for us to fight for our side of the law, for our children's rights to go to school and get their education." So they all did get one, Ruby and a growing number of boys and girls who went to school with her. By the time Ruby was in the 2nd grade, the mobs had given up their struggle to try to scare Ruby and defeat the federal judge's order that New Orleans schools should be desegregated, so that children of all races might be in the same classroom. Year after year, Ruby went to France school and she graduated from it and then went on to graduate from high school. Ruby is married to a building contractor and has 4 sons who attend school in the New Orleans public school system. Now a successful businesswoman, Ruby has created the Educational Foundation for the purpose of increasing parental involvement in schools. Our parent resource for today is the book, "Why Do All the Black Kids Sit Together in the Cafeteria?" and Other Conversations About Race. This is a book that is actually over 20 years old, but in 2017, the author updated it based on all the many changes that we've experienced in our world. Not only will you see in our portion underneath this story time the title of the book, but there is also an updated 2017 podcast or interview with the author, who is a former president of Spelman College in Atlanta. I would encourage you to read and or listen to this short interview. It's a great book about how children of all ages develop their identity and how race is a part of this. As we continue to think about how race impacts us, our children, and especially our school system, I would encourage you to read the book. I would also encourage you to think as parents about all of the many policies that are upheld by the racist structures and systems, especially in public education. I would encourage you to consider writing our Board of Education and/or your congressmen or senators, and think about how we might work together to change not only some of the racist policies and programs here in Guilford County, but across our state and nation. I hope you have a wonderful start to a new school year. Blessings on each of you as families. Take good care, and I'll see you soon.